All right. So you should have just finished reading your independent reading book for 10 minutes. Now we're going to move on to the next thing, and then we'll come back to independent reading. So if you just want to slide that to the side of your desk as we go over a couple of updates that are coming up. First thing, your sources discussion board is due now. So if you've not turned that in yet, you need to do so. Your essays, boxes, and bullets will be due next class. So make sure that you're working towards that. You don't know necessarily what we're talking about here yet, but this is the main goal for today. So we'll get to some more specific instructions as we go through. Please remember that Picture Day is going to be next class for you guys, November 2nd. You must bring your form and your payment that day in order to purchase pictures for yourself. So make sure that your parents fill out that form and they give you some kind of a payment method before you return to my class. Let's move on to our learning goals for today. Your learning goal today is I will create an organizational model to create purposeful structure for your paper. Please notice that you're going to have an organizational model. So sometimes this looks like an outline. Sometimes this will look like different systems of organization. It could look like a graphic organizer. Today we're going to start out at least with the boxes and bullets method that we're familiar with because we applied that when we were reading someone else's work, like the Kwame Nkrumah article. And then you're going to begin developing your own idea through that. Our goal there is to have purposeful structure, not just to organize ideas and have them grouped, but to have them grouped for a reason in a way that matters so that it's significant. So that's going to be our main focus for today. Before we get there, we're going to do a little bit with our independent reading and our vocabulary. First, let's take out your independent reading calendar. What I would like you to do here is we're going to spend about 5 minutes planning how you're going to read your book, when you're going to read your book, and how much you're going to read at a time. So if you take out your independent reading book that you were just reading for the last 10 minutes, and you take out that calendar you picked up on your way inside, what your goal is to decide, when am I going to read which part of the book? So you might want to look really quick, notice how many pages are in your book, how many chapters or how many sections are in your book. Okay, do you want to divide your reading according to how many pages you're reading in a day? Or do you prefer to read it by whole chapters, and then do you want to record how many chapters do you plan on reading in which day? You also want to consider, when you're scheduling your own reading, what schedule works best for me? Do you always have an event on Thursday evenings? In which case, you might want to pick Monday evenings to be a better reading day. Is it better for you if you're consistent and you're reading something every day, or if you're reading something every other day? Would it be easier for you to remember to read on red days since you have this class on red day? Or would it be easier for you to remember to read on blue day because that's when you do your red day homework? Keep those things in mind as you're deciding how you want to schedule your reading. The other thing you want to consider is how difficult that text was for you to read. So some of your stories might be on the easier side for your reading level. Some of them might be on the more challenging side for your reading level. When you look over the story and you read for 10 minutes, how much of the book were you able to read in 10 minutes? Were you able to read 5 pages? Were you only able to read 2? Now, if you walked in late, then this probably doesn't apply as much, okay? But consider how difficult it will be for you to approach the text, and keep that in mind as you're scheduling your reading. If this is a really challenging text for you, it might take more time for you to read, but you probably also don't want to spend like 2 hours sitting and reading in one night. So schedule your reading maybe so that it's spread out a little bit more. Ultimately, you need to have your reading calendar finish your book by the time we return from Thanksgiving break, which will be November 27th. I recommend that you schedule out your reading so that it's happening a little bit every week. It's nice that you have Thanksgiving break in case you need to catch up, but I wouldn't plan to do the whole book in Thanksgiving because you'll need to have some of the book under your belt so that you're able to talk about it and discuss it in class before Thanksgiving break as well. All right, if you want to hit pause in the video at this point, you can take about 5 minutes to plan your reading calendar and finish it, and then you can turn it into the drawer. Then you'll move on to vocabulary. All right, so you should have just turned your independent reading calendar into the drawer. We're going to move on to your vocabulary. And you should have a paper that you picked up on your way inside called From the New to the Known. We're going to start on the 4-column side of that paper. I know there's 2 sides. One has 3, one has 4 columns. We're going to start on the 4-column side of the paper. And as we go through, I'm just going to introduce you to these words that are pretty new to you, okay? You might have heard a couple of them before, but we haven't talked about any of these words in class, so if they're all new, that's okay. And you're going to categorize them. If they're on the far left side, that means that they're a word that's like particularly difficult for you. You didn't even know that word existed. The second to the left is going to be the column where you're like, oh, I have heard that word before, but I'm really not 100% sure what it means. Then the third column is going to be something more like, oh yeah, I've heard that word but I don't know if I could like specifically define it. And then the fourth column is like, wow, I know that word so well, I could use it about 300 times and be just fine. Okay, so I'm going to read off each of these words and put them up on the screen here. I'd like you to follow along, and on your columns, you're just going to write which word goes in which column. Adjourn. Adjourn. Alien. Alien. Sorry about that. Let's fix that really quick. Comely. Comely. Compensate. Compensate. Dissolute. Dissolute. Erratic. Erratic. Expulsion. Expulsion. Faint. Faint. Fodder. Fodder. Fortify. Fortify. Catch up if you're behind a little bit. You can write down these words. Illegible. Illegible. Jeer. Jeer. Lucrative. Lucrative. Mediocre. Mediocre. Proliferate. Proliferate. Subjugate. Subjugate. Sully. Sully. Tantalize. Tantalize. Terse. Terse. Unflinching. Unflinching. All right, you should have written each of those words into one of the columns on your paper. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next thing. So if you could flip your paper over to the 3-column side, and then you're going to go ahead and pick up your vocabulary book. We need to use one book for every partnership. Okay, so one person from each group of 2 needs to go over to the back corner of the room and get a vocabulary book out of the blue box. All right, when you return to your seat, we are going to go right ahead and start on the vocab in context. So you should turn your page in your book to page 22. Let's put this up here. You should be on page 22 through 23. There's a story called Cowgirl Up. I'm going to read this out loud for you. As I read it, you're going to fill in your words for the vocabulary in context side. So this is the 3-column side of your paper. All right, so you can follow along in the book. Whenever we get to a bolded word, you're going to write it in one of those 3 columns and see, do you understand the word better now that you've heard it in context, or is it still confusing? Okay, so Cowgirl Up. This is historical nonfiction. So think as we read this also, we know a little bit now about nonfiction and how it's written, so keep that in mind. People today may consider cowgirls to be folk heroines, but many of the women who helped open America's western cattle country would have jeered and laughed at the term. It had a hint of the dissolute until well into the 20th century. Cowgirls were associated with comely female sharpshooters, ropers, and trick riders of Wild West shows. At that time, working in entertainment meant expulsion from respectable society. But it is said that you can't judge a horse by its color, and the West benefited from the work of all the women there. There was a precedent in the West for women ranchers in the areas governed by Spain from 1697 to 1848. Husbands and wives co-owned vast homesteads under Spanish law. Wives could inherit property. Land ownership fortified the social status of women. Early generations of ranch women were unflinching and determined as they undertook all but the heaviest chores. They rode horses, herded cattle, and performed much of the work wealthier ranchers could compensate cowboys to do. And all the while, these women tended their homes and families. Their contributions helped turn struggling ranches into lucrative enterprises. Some women of the Old West are legends, while others have stories that have only been remembered by their families. Susan McSween lived in New Mexico at the time of Billy the Kid and the Lincoln County Wars. Rather than adjourn to a humdrum town life after her husband's murder in 1878, young Susan McSween purchased a ranch. Soon, McSween, the cattle queen of New Mexico, owned over 8,000 head of cattle. She lived much of her life running her ranch and selling real estate. Lily Casey grew up in the early 1900s in a one-room house in West Texas, where, as a young child, she drove the family wagon to town to sell eggs. Her family bought a ranch in New Mexico when she was 11 years old. Casey's mother did not find the alien, difficult ranch work tantalizing, so Casey began overseeing most of the ranch work when she was barely a teenager. Exhausted by running the ranch without support, Casey left home at age 15 to teach in a town 500 miles away. She rode a horse all the way and arrived at her new job sullied and hungry. 28 days later, Casey taught for many years before returning to ranching during the 1930s. Nobody would pin the label mediocre on the life of Martha Jane Canary. Born in 1852 in Missouri, she was separated from her family at an early age. To support herself, she worked erratically as a waitress, a nurse, a Pony Express rider, a mule and ox team driver, and a gold prospector. It was during her times as an Army Scout that she met Buffalo Bill and earned her famous nickname, Calamity Jane. She traveled through much of the West, and stories of her adventures proliferated. She died in South Dakota in 1903. She is buried next to another Western hero whose life is fodder for outrageous stories, Wild Bill Hickok. While early ranch women were the first cowgirls, such women exist today. The National Cowgirl Hall of Fame in Texas first opened its doors in 1975 and has over 150 inductees. Among the cowgirls honored are a Pulitzer Prize winner, the first female chief of the Cherokee Nation, and a Supreme Court justice. All right, look over that. If you miss any of the bolded words, go ahead and write them under the column that you best understood the meaning. Okay? And then you can go ahead and put away your vocabulary books and turn in, let's have one partner put away the vocab book and the other partner can turn in the column sheets for both of you. Okay? Go ahead and pause the slide and move on to the next.